Murphy, what are you doing here? Your ship, it's gone. The pencil hit the floor. The manager's face drained of every last color. He wasn't looking at a man. He was looking at a ghost who didn't know he was dead yet. Charles Murphy had been late that afternoon. Just a few hours. By the time he reached the waterfront, the Kaliyuga had already vanished into the gray silence of Lake Huron, taking 28 men with her. For over 2 centuries, the Great Lakes of Lake have swallowed more than 6,000 ships and 30,000 lives. But the deepest horror may never have been the water, never the storm. It was the signature on the departure order. The manager who looked the other way. The captain who knew the hull was cracking and said nothing. Today, we opened 3 cases that have never been fully closed. Stay with me until the very end. Because when you sit with it long enough, you will arrive at a question that no story before has forced you to face so directly. Once nature has made its decision, what is there left for man to do? Kaliyuga, a Sanskrit word. In Hindu scripture, it translates as the final age of mankind, the age of darkness, of decay, of a world losing its way. When shipbuilder Simon Lingell christened his new vessel at the St. Clair, Michigan shipyard in 1887, some men on the docks quietly shook their heads. You don't name a ship after the end of days. But Lingell wasn't thinking about prophecy. He was thinking about iron ore. The Caluga was built to carry it. A wooden-hulled bulk freighter, 269 feet long, 1,941 gross tons, powered by a coal-fired steam engine. She was a working ship, a practical ship, a ship that belonged to an era already dying around her. By 1905, the Great Lakes were filling with steel-hulled giants. Stronger, faster, more efficient. The Caluga was among the very last of the wooden steamers, still grinding out her runs between the Iron Range ports and the steel mills of the East. She was a relic, fighting to stay relevant in a world that had already moved on without her. In that sense, her name was more fitting than anyone wanted to admit. On the afternoon of October 18th, 1905, the Caluga departed Marquette, Michigan, her holds loaded heavy with iron ore, bound for Erie, Pennsylvania. At the helm was Captain Fred Tonkin, a man in his first year as a lake pilot, still learning the language that Lake Huron speaks when it decides to turn ugly. What no one said loudly enough, what no one wrote in a log or filed in a report, was this: the Caluga was sailing dangerously short-handed. For a vessel of her size, a proper crew numbered between 24 and 26 men, including 4 to 6 firemen whose sole job was to keep the boilers fed and burning, 4 to 6 coal passers, a third mate, and a third engineer. She sailed with 17. Only 2 firemen. No coal passers on record, no third mate, no third engineer. And now her second mate, Charles Murphy, was missing too. Murphy had missed the boat at their previous stop in Erie, Pennsylvania, delayed by a visit with a friend that ran a few hours too long. By the time he reached the waterfront, the Caluga had already gone. He stood on the dock, watching her disappear. He expected to be fired. He walked to the company office, shoulders braced for the worst. The Caluga passed through the locks at Sault Ste. Marie in the early hours of October 19th, moving from Lake Superior down into Lake Huron. What waited for her there was not mercy. A powerful gale had been building out of the northeast, the kind of storm that the old lakemen called A widowmaker. Winds clocked at 72 miles per hour. Waves that didn't roll so much as collapse on top of you. The Kaliyuga had no safe anchorage within reach. Captain Tonkin made the only decision available to him: head east toward the Bruce Peninsula, keep the lee shore behind him, and ride it out. She was spotted at 4 o'clock in the afternoon by the steamer Frontenac, 7 miles east of Presque Isle, Michigan. Still moving, still fighting. Around sunset, Captain John Duddleson of the steamer L.C. Waldo caught a final glimpse of her somewhere between Middle Island and Thunder Bay Island, still steaming east against the wind. That was the last time human eyes ever saw the Kaliyuga. At around 2 o'clock in the morning of October 20th, the gale did something that lake storms sometimes do. Something cruel and precise. It shifted from northeast to northwest. In a matter of hours, the entire architecture of the storm reversed itself. The waves that had been pushing her east were now crashing broadside. New swells built from a different direction entirely. The strain of competing forces, wind from one angle, waves from another, is the kind of load that breaks ships, even steel ships. For a tired wooden hull, already straining with a full cargo of iron ore, and an engine running on the labor of 2 firemen instead of 6, it may have been the end. But no one knows for certain, because the Kaliyuga left no wreck to find. On October 26th, the steamer Lily Smith discovered the Kaliyuga's pilot house floating in Georgian Bay near Cove Island. Torn free, still painted the dark yellow and white of the Cleveland Cliffs fleet, drifting alone in the gray water like a question with no answer. 3 days later, on October 29th, the body of oiler Charles Beaugrand washed ashore 3 miles south of Kincardine, Ontario. In his pocket was a notebook. On the second page, written in the final minutes of his life, was a farewell note to his father. Calm, brief, heartbreaking in its simplicity. Dear Father, goodbye. I have a bank book in the Cleveland Society of Savings. That was all. No panic, no blame. Just a man settling his affairs in the only way left to him, in the dark, in the water, knowing it was over. On November 2nd, 3 more bodies came ashore. Deckhand John Rush found in the harbor at Port Elgin, Ontario. Deckhand John Yoder and Steward LaFlamme recovered near Southampton. Both Rush and Beaugrand were still wearing their Kaliyuga life preservers. It made no difference. The wreck itself has never been found. 12 men went down with her. The lake kept them. Based on the location of the bodies and the debris, there are 2 primary theories regarding the fate of the Kaliyuga. The first theory: the Kaliyuga foundered in the middle of Lake Huron on the night of October 19th, likely overwhelmed by massive waves or the sudden shift in the wind direction. The storm's force drove the bodies toward the southeast, while the prevailing currents carried pieces of the wreckage into Georgian Bay. The second theory: the Kaliyuga successfully reached the eastern shore of Lake Huron, with some crew members being swept overboard during the transit. Upon arrival, the wind shifted, threatening to drive the vessel onto the lee shore. In a desperate bid for safety, the ship attempted to round the Bruce Peninsula to seek shelter in Georgian Bay, only to strike a shoal in either the Main Canal or McGregor Canal on the morning of October 20th. In the weeks that followed, investigators and maritime officials quietly noted what had been true before the ship ever left port. The Kaliyuga had sailed with a crew that was, by any reasonable standard, not enough. A normal complement of firemen for that engine, that cargo, that run, 4 to 6 men. She had 2. On a wooden-hulled steamer in the middle of a late-season gale, the boilers are everything. They are the heartbeat of the ship. They generate the steam that turns the engine, the engine that drives the screw that keeps the bow pointed into the waves instead of sideways to them. When you lose steam pressure, when exhausted firemen can no longer keep the coal burning fast enough, you don't just slow down. You lose steerage. You lose control. And in 72-mile-per-hour winds on Lake Huron, losing control means one thing. So ask the question that nobody in 1905 wanted to ask out loud. Who made that decision? Who looked at the crew manifest, counted 2 firemen where 6 should stand, counted 17 men where 24 should sail, and signed the departure order anyway? Was it Captain Tonkin, a first-year pilot still proving himself, perhaps too inexperienced to push back against company pressure? Was it the owners at St. Clair Steamship Company, calculating that a short-handed crew meant lower payroll on one more run before the season closed? Was it simply the culture of the lakes in 1905? A culture where men sailed undermanned and overloaded because that was what men did, because the lakes had been survived before and would be survived again, because the ore needed to move and the mills needed feeding, and no one wanted to be the man who said, "Stop." Charles Murphy missed his ship because an afternoon moved slowly. 16 men did not miss theirs. The difference between them was not skill. It was not courage. It was not seamanship or strength or any quality a man can build in himself. It was a few hours on a dock in Erie, Pennsylvania. It was the random arithmetic of fate, the kind that doesn't care about fairness, doesn't negotiate, and doesn't explain itself. But fate is not the same as responsibility. Somewhere between the departure manifest and the bottom of Lake Huron, between the company ledger and the farewell note in Charles Beaugrand's pocket, there is a question that the water never answered, and that the men who signed those papers never had to face. If you send men into a storm on a ship you know is not ready, does the storm absolve you? The Caluga is still down there. Somewhere in the cold black of Lake Huron, in water so deep and so dark that no diver has ever touched her. She has never been found. She has never been explained. She is, in every sense of her name, a ghost of the age of darkness. And she was only the beginning. My dear friends, there are 2 kinds of trust that men place in the things they build. The first is earned slowly, through years of use, through storms survived, through the accumulated testimony of those who came before. The second is borrowed in advance, placed not in experience, but in the promise of something new. The W.H. Gilcher was built on the second kind, and when it was finally tested, it did not hold. In 1890, the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company laid down 2 vessels that were meant to announce the arrival of a new era on the Great Lakes. Side by side in the yard on Detroit Street in Cleveland, hull number 9 and hull number 10 took shape from steel plate. Not wood, not iron, but steel. 300 feet long. The largest bulk carriers the lakes had ever seen. They were called the Western Reserve and the W.H. Gilcher, and their arrival was greeted with the kind of excitement reserved for things that feel like the future arriving ahead of schedule. The W.H. Gilcher was named for William H. Gilcher, one of the owners of Gilchrist, Gilcher and Shuck of Sandusky, the company that had commissioned her construction at a cost of $200,000. She measured 301.5 feet in length, 41.2 feet abeam, with a depth of 21.1 feet, powered by a 1,200 horsepower triple expansion steam engine. From her very first season, she performed brilliantly. In September 1892, She set a record hauling 113,885 bushels of wheat from Chicago to Buffalo. She was fast, efficient, and profitable. Everything her owners had promised investors she would be. She was, by every visible measure, the finest ship on the Great Lakes. On August 30th, 1892, the Western Reserve, the Gilcher's near-identical sister ship, built from the same mill runs of steel plate at the same Cleveland yard, was sailing in ballast on Lake Superior when, without warning, a sudden jolt shuddered through the hull. The mainmast crashed to the deck. Within minutes, the ship broke completely in half. 2 lifeboats were launched. One capsized immediately. The second carried the survivors through the night until it, too, capsized a mile from shore the following morning. Of all the souls aboard, only one man survived. A single person named Stewart, who clung to consciousness long enough to swim to the Upper Peninsula shore and walk 12 miles to the nearest life-saving station at Deer Park, Michigan. One survivor. From a ship that had been called unsinkable 8 weeks before. Investigators moved quickly. Tests were conducted on the steel recovered from the Western Reserve. The verdict was damning. The Bessemer steel used in constructing both ships was brittle. Under certain conditions of stress and cold, precisely the conditions that Great Lakes storms reliably produce, it could fracture suddenly and completely without the bending and creaking that gives sailors warning. It did not fail gradually. It failed all at once. Both ships, same steel, same yard, same mill runs. The W.H. Gilcher had been built from the same material. On October 26, 1892, just 8 weeks after the Western Reserve broke apart on Lake Superior, while public debate over brittle steel and shipbuilder negligence was still filling the newspapers, the W.H. Gilcher departed Buffalo, New York, carrying 3,080 tons of coal bound for Milwaukee. At her helm was Captain Leeds H. Weeks, an experienced master who knew his ship well. Her crew numbered 18 men, most of them from the Buffalo area. Fathers, sons, brothers, men with families who lived close enough to the water to hear it from their front porches on quiet nights. Captain Weeks knew about the Western Reserve. Every man on that crew knew. The maritime community on the Great Lakes in 1892 was not large. News traveled between ports the way it always traveled among people who share a dangerous profession, fast and with weight. They knew what had happened to the sister ship. They knew what the investigators were saying about the steel. And they went anyway. Perhaps Captain Weeks trusted the loading. The Western Reserve had been sailing in ballast, empty holds, no cargo, riding high and vulnerable to the twisting forces of a storm. The Gilcher was loaded with 3,080 tons of coal. A fully laden ship sits lower, moves more steadily, is generally considered more stable in heavy weather. Perhaps he believed that the difference in loading was the difference between disaster and safety. Perhaps he simply had nowhere else to put his faith. The trip was uneventful for the first 2 days. On the afternoon of October 28th at 2:30 in the afternoon, the W.H. Gilcher passed through the Straits of Mackinac and entered Lake Michigan. A powerful storm was already building over the northern part of the lake. Other vessels were turning back, seeking shelter. South Manitou Harbor filled with storm-battered ships riding at anchor, their captains waiting for the weather to break. The Gilcher pushed forward, pushed. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Captain Buchanan of the schooner Seaman spotted a large steamer approximately 20 miles northwest of North Manitou Island. He watched it carefully. The ship was there. But something was terribly wrong. No one was visible on deck. Not a single figure moving anywhere on that 301-foot hull. No one at the rail. No one on the bridge wing. In the middle of a storm, on one of the most powerful ships ever built for these lakes, the deck was completely empty. The steamer appeared unresponsive, sitting in the water, not maneuvering, not fighting the waves. Just there, silent, still. Captain Buchanan watched for as long as he could before the storm swallowed the image entirely. That was the last time any living person observed the W.H. Gilcher with any crew aboard. When the storm finally broke on October 29th and ships began emerging from their sheltered anchorages, the Gilcher was not among them. Captain Dennis of the schooner, John Shaw, passing off South Manitou Island, found the lake littered with wreckage, furniture, pieces of a bridge, debris spread across the water with the particular randomness of a ship that had come apart rather than slowly sinking. The steamer White and Freant recovered pieces of the Gilcher's pilot house from the same area. On November 18th, 2 bodies wearing W.H. Gilcher life preservers were found on Fox Island along with the ship's mizzenmast. 18 men, gone without explanation. Gone without a single survivor to say what happened in those final hours. 18 families in Buffalo received the news. The investigation that followed asked the question that the wreck itself refused to answer. Had the Gilcher broken apart the same way the Western Reserve had? Her Bessemer steel fracturing in the cold and the stress, the hull splitting suddenly, giving no one on board the time or warning to react. Was that why Captain Buchanan saw an empty deck? Not because the crew had abandoned ship, but because the ship had already failed so completely and so quickly that there was no longer anything anyone could do? The president of Cleveland Shipbuilding, Henry D. Coffinberry, maintained publicly that both vessels had been constructed according to the best shipbuilding practices known at the time. He suggested the Gilcher may have struck a reef or collided with the smaller schooner Ostrich, which was found capsized on the beach of South Manitou Island that same night. But the investigators knew what the tests had shown. The steel was brittle. New laws for the testing of steel in shipbuilding were passed in the aftermath, the kind of legislation that only arrives after enough men have died to make the cost of inaction politically unacceptable. The W.H. Gilcher has never been found. She remains to this day the largest undiscovered shipwreck in Lake Michigan, a ship that record-breaking and celebrated in life and completely invisible in death. 18 men trusted that steel. They trusted the technology. They trusted the word of builders who built with the best knowledge they had, and perhaps with something less than the caution they should have had. And here is the weight of it that stays with you long after the facts are memorized. Captain Weeks and his crew knew the Western Reserve was gone. They knew the steel was under scrutiny. They stood on that dock in Buffalo on October 26th with full knowledge of what had happened 8 weeks before, and they made a choice. Sometimes the most honest thing a man can do is ask whether the faith he carries is faith at all, or whether it is simply the refusal to believe that the thing he has trusted could ever truly fail him. The lake off North Manitou Island keeps that answer still. Not every ship that sank on the Great Lakes sank because of a bad decision. Some sank because the world they were built for had changed around them, quietly, irreversibly, and no one recognized the danger until it was too late to turn back. The Clifton is that story. A A ship that did everything right, carrying everything wrong. A ship that the lakes swallowed whole and kept hidden for nearly a century. And when she was finally found, what divers pulled from the darkness was not an answer. It was a question that cut even deeper. She was born in 1892 at the American Steel Barge Company in West Superior, Wisconsin, under the name Samuel Mather, christened after the co-founder of Pickens, Mather and Company, at the time the second largest shipping fleet on the Great Lakes. She was a whaleback, one of only 44 ever constructed between 1887 and 1898, designed by the visionary Captain Alexander McDougall. The whaleback was unlike any ship the lakes had ever seen. Her hull curved upward at the sides and rounded over the top, so that when fully loaded, she sat low in the water. Her deck almost flush with the surface, her silhouette resembling the smooth, arching back of a whale breaking the surface. She was 308 feet long, 30 feet abeam, built to carry iron ore with ruthless efficiency. Where conventional ships presented a broad flat deck to the wind and waves, the whaleback let them pass over her. Sailors called them pig boats, partly for the snout-shaped bow, partly because life below decks with no portholes and no natural light felt like being sealed inside a steel barrel. But they worked. For 3 decades, the Samuel Mather proved her design sound, crossing and recrossing the Great Lakes without incident. By 1923, however, she was 31 years old and iron ore was no longer her trade. Her owners, the Progress Steamship Company of Cleveland, a subsidiary of Cleveland Cliffs, decided she had one more transformation left in her. In 1923 and 1924, she was refitted as a carrier of stone aggregate and given a new name, Clifton, after the port in Michigan. Most significantly, she was equipped with a Smith-patented topside self-unloading system, a modern innovation designed to let the ship deliver cargo without relying on expensive shore-based equipment. The machinery was installed directly above the center line of the vessel. It was heavy. It raised her center of gravity. It reduced her righting moment, her ability to recover when a wave rolled her sideways. And it was added the same year she disappeared. On Saturday, September 20th, 1924, Captain Emmett Gallagher was loading 2,200 tons of crushed stone at Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. He was already short of crew. The newly converted self-unloader, despite its name, actually required more men to operate than the old configuration, not fewer. The chief engineer was sent to find enough hands. When the Clifton finally left Sturgeon Bay, she carried 26 men aboard. Captain Gallagher's destination was the Birmingham Sand and Stone Company dock in Detroit. He hoped to arrive by late Monday afternoon. At 10:20 on the morning of September 21st, 1924, the Clifton passed the old Mackinac Point light and entered Lake Huron. Conditions were uncomfortable but not unusual. A strong southwest wind, building seas. Gallagher logged her position and continued southeast. That was the last confirmed report of the Clifton. By late that Sunday afternoon, the storm had strengthened into something ferocious. An experienced skipper who fought his own way through that gale later told investigators that no vessel of the Clifton's size could have survived those conditions if caught 40 miles out to sea. The wind drove the waves with a violence that left no margin for a heavily top-weighted whaleback running low in the water with a full load of crushed stone. No distress signal was ever received. No mayday, no radio call, nothing. On September 26th, painted sticks from the Clifton washed ashore 24 miles northeast of Pointe-aux-Barques. More wreckage drifted to the Canadian side of Lake Huron in the days that followed. But no bodies ever came ashore. Not one. The investigators who examined the evidence drew a quiet and terrible conclusion. The Clifton had sunk so suddenly, so completely, that her 26 men had no time to react. No time to reach a lifeboat. No time to send a signal. No time to do anything at all. She was simply there, and then she was not. For nearly a century, the prevailing theory blamed the design. The whaleback, critics argued, was inherently unstable. Her low, rounded profile, so graceful in calm water, made her vulnerable to capsizing in a serious sea. Add the weight of the self-unloading machinery high above her centerline, and the Clifton became a ship fighting her own geometry every time a wave rolled under her. Then, in September 2016, diver David Trotter found her. Trotter had spent 30 years searching. He had located more than 60 Great Lakes shipwrecks in 4 decades of diving, but the Clifton had always eluded him. She was found by accident. Trotter's team was surveying 2 other wrecks when they spotted a 3rd unidentified hull on the lakebed. They logged the coordinates, returned months later, and the GoPro footage confirmed it immediately. The Clifton was the only whaleback shipwreck left undiscovered in Lake Huron. There was, as Trotter said, no question. She lay on her port side at 165 feet, approximately 100 miles south of where most searchers had been looking. The bow was completely shattered from the impact with the lake bottom. The stern, the interior paneling, the architecture, remarkably preserved. An unopened suitcase lay in the cabin. The stone cargo was still spilling from her holds, and the self-unloading mechanism was still in position, intact, undamaged. It had not broken free. It had not swung loose and destabilized her. The machinery that generations of investigators had blamed for her loss was exactly where it had been placed, which meant the theory that had stood for 92 years was wrong. The hull itself was sound. The whaleback design had held. Something else had killed the Clifton. Maritime expert Valerie von Haste, who documented the discovery for the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association, noted a detail that gave the story one final, unsettling layer. 3 other ships fitted with the identical self-unloading system had also sunk. 4 refitted ships lost in relatively quick succession. The machinery may not have broken free that night, but the question of whether those additional tons of weight above the centerline, combined with a sea that an experienced captain later described as unsurvivable for a vessel that size, created a ship that simply had no margin left when the storm reached its peak. That question has never been fully closed. What the wreck proved, ultimately, was this: sometimes there is no villain. No signed departure order from a company prioritizing profit. No crew manifest with too few names. No captain who knew better and chose the schedule over the safety of his men. Sometimes a storm arrives with more force than any ship, any well-built, properly loaded, carefully maintained ship was designed to withstand. Sometimes the lake holds cards that no amount of preparation, responsibility, or seamanship can beat. Captain Emmett Gallagher did not make the mistake that killed him. He sailed a sound ship into a storm that was stronger than sound ships. 26 men went to the bottom of Lake Huron on the night of September 21st, 1924. No bodies, no final messages, no farewell notes found in anyone's pockets. Just a ship that passed a lighthouse at 10:20 in the morning and never appeared again, found a century later, lying in 165 feet of cold, dark water, holding an unopened suitcase that no one has yet brought to the surface. There are failures born of negligence. There are disasters born of greed. And then, there are losses like the Clifton that remind us quietly and permanently that the lake does not always need a reason. Sometimes it simply takes My dear friends, 3 ships, 3 silences. The Kaliyuga, sent out undermanned, her pilot house found drifting alone in Georgian Bay. The W.H. Gilcher, built from steel that broke like glass, her deck empty and silent when the last eyes ever saw her. The Clifton, a sound ship in a storm that outweighed everything, found a century later still holding an unopened suitcase. They did not disappear without consequence. Every safety regulation on these lakes today exists because families buried empty caskets and demanded their grief mean something more than an insurance claim. The dead paid for the safety the living now take for granted. But these lakes are not so different from the life most of us are already living. We all have our final voyages of the season, deadlines that cannot move, quotas that must be met, expectations pressing down on decisions that deserve more time. We all carry patched holes, things we know need real attention, covered with temporary fixes because the schedule never allowed for anything more. We all stand, at some point, at our own crossroads, where one route offers shelter and the other offers speed, and someone is always watching which one we choose. The question these ships leave behind is not whether the men who sailed them were brave or reckless. The question is whether the system around them ever gave them a real choice at all. Do you believe they did? And if you have an ancestor who once worked these waters, who fired boilers through November storms, who loaded iron ore at dawn and never came home, share their name in the comments below. Let's make sure they are not forgotten. Finally, before I close today, thank you, genuinely, for staying until the end, for sitting with these stories, for letting these men matter to you the way they matter to me. If this message is something to you, a like and a subscription costs nothing, but it keeps stories like these alive. I'll see you in the next one.